Next up, we'll explore one of the most important trends in fintech, open banking or open finance. Open finance can be defined as the ability to access and act on financial data to build personalized experiences, increase the pace of innovation, and drive industry collaboration. Open finance enables everyone to access and act on financial data to make intelligent decisions through data insights, build personalized money experiences, enable new business models, support financial wellness, and mitigate fraud and risk. To provide you with further insights into this important topic and to introduce you to our next keynote speaker, please welcome Sensedia's Chief Marketing Officer, Lisa Arthur.
Good afternoon, Fintech South attendees and TAG members. It's great to see you all out there on this Hotlanta afternoon. Sensedia is really proud to be a second-year sponsor of this event and to be able to sponsor the next speaker. Before I do that, I'm just going to take 2 minutes, no slides, to tell you who Sensedia is. We're a global leader in API management as well as a modern integration platform. Well, what does that mean? And what does that mean if you're a fintech? Well, I was inspired by my grandchildren, and I brought some Duplos to explain what that means. And if you will, this bottom area is an API platform. We don't make the APIs. We make the APIs more secure, more easily governed, and with our work with Financial Data Exchange, our next speaker, enterprise grade, so that we can drive everything from open banking, ecosystems and marketplaces, to true open finance, which we are a leader of. With that, I'm proud that here at this show, we announced a new fintech customer this morning, Localite from Long Beach, California. Don't know if Localite's in the audience, but I thought I would use that customer as a way to explain the API play for fintechs. So here, if you will, is our Localite team. We have a developer portal, we have the builder, and behind them is the third-party services that they can provide. Now, this whole thing represents a credit union, and they're a fintech. So through their portal, embedding into this fintech, they will be able, along with Sensedia's help, to take their local businesses that are their customers or members. This is a gardening company, and their local members. This is one of the credit union's customers, and through very secure API bridges and their embedded solution, connect it so that the merchants and the consumers are brought closer together, all from the financial service team of the credit union. And these bricks show how other solutions could build out for the credit union to innovate their customer experience, to help drive better economics for their members and businesses, and ultimately revolutionize local commerce. It's pretty exciting that an API can help enable that, but we're excited to work with Localite, and we'd love to work with other fintechs, as we do around the world, to help make our end customers' journey more seamless. And financially secure. Not from their finances, but financial grade integration. And that's what will bring me to introduce our speaker. We have been a strategic partner of the Financial Data Exchange for over a year and a half now. In November, it'll be 2 years. We've worked to understand their patterns, to build a solution that supports the FDX patterns, and they are working with credit unions and banks across North America to assure that open is not a four-letter word. And so with that, it's with great pride I bring to the stage the Senior Product Director of the Financial Data Exchange, Jean-Paul LaClair. Jean-Paul.
Thank you, Lisa. That, I think, definitely brings a whole new meaning to Lego Duplo for me. But good morning. Thank you. Championing open finance. It's quite the topic to cover in less than 20 minutes. But it's one that's very, very relevant today. Open finance saves FinTech $10 billion in new revenue. Now, yes, this is very much a fictitious headline, but I definitively can tell you that the opportunity space is very, very real. So whether you're a founder or a veteran of financial services, the opportunity space we have in front of us is quite massive. And I hope the conversation today is very much starting to level set a bit around what do we mean, what's already been underway, and what's possibly next when it comes to this broader journey. But before we get started on that, what's the difference? Open banking, open finance, you may even hear reference to open data. Many times these words are used interchangeably as if they were one and the same. Directionally, that's fine. But arguably at the bottom of this, it's really talking about the end consumer's experience and their ability to share their information, their financial information, in the pursuit of better experiences, in the pursuit of better products, in the pursuit of their ultimate financial goals. And as we think through this a bit more, I want to talk a bit about a couple different elements. And as we think about open banking, traditionally that is defined as the end consumer's ability to share data that they generate, their data, to others. User permissioned, accessible, traceable, transparent. But open finance is the exact same, just with a broader scope, broader data scopes. So it's not just banking as far as checking and card and mortgage, it's the totality of one's financial life. But in order to get to that state of this aspirational vision, how do you do that? How do you get different players in an ecosystem being able to communicate together? And I might argue that today, that opportunity space is a bit limited. We have essentially a lack of interoperability when it comes to the different products and platforms and services and applications that are in production today. And as we think this through a bit longer, what we're trying to get at is there is an opportunity space to have a common language. Imagine a world where you were shopping online and every single retailer that you purchased from accepted a different currency. How is that sustainable? Or imagine a world back in the past where every bank at the turn of the millennium used different currencies. In actuality, that was true. The Fed didn't print money until after the early 1900s. So what we have in this financial ecosystem here in North America today is what's vividly explained in the illustration on the screen is that there is a proliferation of different standards, which doesn't necessarily solve for the business problem at the core of it, which is whomever you are in this ecosystem, you're trying to create better experiences. And how might you be able to ensure that the language that you're talking amongst each other's, API language, if you will, is built using the same language, built using the same specifications. So that's a little bit where FDX comes into play. And I wanted to transition a bit about talking about the promise of interoperability to what does a standard mean? What does a technical standard, a market standard mean? And I like to use illustrations here. Lisa used Duplo. We'll use a more simpler analogy of a truck. And in our industry, in financial services, we have responsibility of building the how. It's the technology. So in the analogy of a truck, think about how the truck is built and constructed to actually transfer some type of material safely and securely. And that's what we're doing in technologies with our products, our applications, our platforms. We have a standardized payload, we have security and authorization standards, we have a degree of connectivity. That ultimately is the responsibility, and we're trying to build a standard that everybody understands. But it's not just the technology, there is the experience that comes into play as well. So akin to that truck analogy again is imagine a dashboard in your truck that makes sure you have an understanding of where you're going, the speed you're traveling. Very much akin to what we do from a digital experience with user interfaces, is making sure that it's very much friendly for the end consumer. But it's not just technology. There is a complicated relationship, and maybe complicated is the wrong word, but where the industry interacts with the government. And while the industry is driving the how, we do believe that the government plays a role when they determine the what. So in the analogy of driving, they set the speed limit. So as the truck's driving down the road, they are ensuring a degree of safety and soundness. And as we are thinking about this in technology, same thing, safety and soundness to ensure that we are not building recklessly that may have massive implications to the ecosystem at large. So at FDX, the Financial Data Exchange, about 5 years ago, there was a recognition that the ability to create new experiences was going to rest on the promise of exchanging data, specifically financial data. And as it was founded, there was two different ecosystems, the traditional data providers, financial institutions, if you will, and those that were receiving data, fintechs, applications, data aggregators, who are trying to augment that on top. Well, FDX came into play to recognize, well, the problem is exactly the same. The ability for us to create and build new requires the use of specific types of financial data elements, data structures, and that's where FDX comes into play, is crafting a standard around that so that as anyone is in the ecosystem is building some application or product or service, they don't have to recreate the wheel. They don't have to rethink the platform. They don't have to rebuild a new API. So within FDX, there are presently over 660 different data elements. And this is also, by the way, where the distinction between open banking and open finance is getting more blurred, because it's not just data elements for your checking accounts or your auto loan. It's even now going into the promise of open finance when it comes to small to medium-sized businesses, corporate treasury, payroll, utilities, telecom. The totality of that financial life is at the core of what many of us are trying to solve for. So how we envision this coming into play, and an ecosystem always exists. It's a very dangerous word to use, and there will never perfectly be an ecosystem. But when it comes to data sharing, we are very much adamant that it's one that's focused on the end user, one that is definitively driven by the customer. So at this stage, it's interoperable, it's interconnected, and the players that exist are all operating in a much more efficient, convenient, and hopefully inclusive way, because with a true ecosystem, we do believe that inclusivity also drives innovation. So where does FDX come into play in this ecosystem? Well, there's traditional players that exist today. And at the one hand of the illustration here, you see what we call data providers. These are the individual organizations that have responsibility where an end user is doing something that creates some data. How do they ensure it's secure? How do they maintain privacy? How do they enable authorization of sharing that safely and being mindful of privacy? On the other side, you've got data recipients who have historically said, let me access to that data. I've got these new innovative ideas to create better experiences if I have the ability to understand. And then what exists in North America is this bridge in the middle often, the data access platforms who essentially help facilitate in a more effective and efficient way the transfer of data through APIs. But really at the center of it is the end consumer. And where FDX comes into play is where any time data is being shared, how do you ensure you're building it to a standard that everyone is leveraging? Because that is where the promise, again, of interoperability comes into play. Now, this isn't just theory, it's actually happening. Currently in North America, as of just this past spring, we have over 53 million consumer accounts somehow using the FDX API data structures. Kind of compares to a study that MIT recently completed where 87% of you are already sharing data. You're already participating in open banking, but only 43% of you know it. So it's interesting, right? A proof point that this is actually happening. These are true API calls that exist in the ecosystem, but people don't know how, they don't know why. And that's where some opportunity space comes into play. So yes, we talk about standards, we talk about the promise of interoperability, we talk about an ecosystem where user permission data is being exchanged, and how does the end user actually have access rights to the data that's being generated. Well, what does that actually mean for the ecosystem? What are those benefits potentially looking like? And the illustration you see here is illustrative to kind of signal some of the ways in which benefits come into play. But on the far left-hand side, you'll see the common use cases around personal financial management. Think about any applications you have on your phone that enable you to budget, set goals, keep you reminding about where you're going. To wealth management, think of robo-advisors. To credit decisioning, using different types of data sources to understand someone's ability to pay. To ultimately account verification. But underneath these are some really interesting use cases within the FDX space that we've seen adoption to. So not only PFM, but also the account verification, the ability to link accounts for money movement. And as we think about some kind of more abstract use cases that are anonymized, think about a credit card application. So you've got a consumer, Miley, who's shopping online for this new console that she's really interested in. But she recognizes it's incredibly pricey. So at the same time as she's shopping, she sees a credit card offer. And at that same moment, she has the ability, with just a few fingerprints, to essentially share all of her basic information when it comes to her name and her income, to verifying her identity, completing all the KYC, aka know your customer routines, so that by the end of that, not only have you made a decision, but you provisioned a new card in the digital wallet, and by the time that this consumer is at checkout, it's all good. And that's because the exchange of data, built to a common standard, is enabling a really quicker way to decision and create efficiency. Mortgage is the same way, a little bit more complex than credit cards, but mortgage really relies tremendously on documents, still to this day in 2023. Tax forms, pay stubs, and oftentimes as you're applying for a mortgage, you still are either scanning your picture on your phone and emailing it. Some companies still are leveraging fax. The reality is now, how might we actually leverage new standards to actually create electronic versions of those documents that are machine ingestible, that have no chain of custody issues. Those are all things that have the opportunity to be created because of a common specification when it comes to your APIs. And in everything in life, I've learned that adages are very true. So there's an adage called the carrot and the stick, as far as how might you motivate someone to do something. And I would argue to date we've been talking a lot about the carrot piece, but there is a stick. And often cases in our industry in financial services, that stick is the government. It's the regulators. And definitely wanted to take an opportunity to talk about what is on the horizon from a regulatory perspective as well. And over the past 6 years, we have seen an acceleration of interest from regulators in the US around how might they be able to provide true financial access rights to every end consumer in the United States. And the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is the one that's likely to enforce this thought. And there is a dormant port of the Dodd-Frank Act, specifically Section 1033, that gives the CFPB the authority to provide some rulemaking around how consumers have portability rights with their data. And CFPB has been going through their traditional rounds of rulemaking, again, 6 years, 2017 to the present. But the acceleration of just 2023 is pretty tremendous. Just as of this past June, the director of the CFPB announced that there will be rulemaking dropping in October of this year. Not only did he say that in some of the CFPB blog posts, but he made that in testimony to both houses of Congress. And what we're really interested by is he made nods to the fact that in the United States, the industry has a place to play when it comes to setting the technical standards of how data gets exchanged. If you compare that to other jurisdictions around the world, the government told industry what data needed to be exchanged. So it's really compelling to see a pivot from a regulatory perspective here in the US. We share this because all of us are trying to build new experiences. All of us are trying to create a better ecosystem. So as you think about the actual value proposition that you're ultimately trying to deliver, it's important to be mindful of what might be evolving on the regulatory landscape. And the CFPB will likely have the ability to create enforcement acts across the ecosystem. It's not necessarily the OCC that just thinks about banks. CFPB will be thinking about other players that are presently perhaps a bit unregulated, fintechs. So proposed rulemaking is likely dropping in October. Well, it's not likely dropping, it is. We just don't know what's precisely in it. But the hypothesis that the implementation of having to start complying with the rule will be occurring in the beginning of 2024. So it's a carrot and a stick. Again, that's the standard. We do believe there's the how and the what to everything that's built. So where does this actually start coming into fruition? And I think back to, crazy enough, how it's been almost 20 years that I've been in financial services. And when I first entered into banking, it was called internet banking. There wasn't necessarily mobile applications. And the channel was referred to as alternative. It was still very much a time where branches, the physical, call centers, the phone, that was what drove experiences for those in financial services. What was happening from a digital perspective was just to reduce costs. So we're in an interesting inflection point, I would argue again, when it comes to financial services, where there's likely a new channel forming. Whether you want to call it open finance, whether you want to call it APIs, arguably they're one and the same, that's where we're going. And what's really compelling here is, how does this actually happen? A lot of organizations do not necessarily have a solid approach to how this actually gets operationalized. So what I would challenge you to think about too, no matter where you are in your journey here, is that there's likely an approach you have to take when it comes to unpacking how you want to actually strategically think about and ultimately manage your APIs strategy. And I would argue it's very much akin to having your roadmap and your engine room operating together. And there is intentionality between the strategy you set, as everything in life, and the actual management system choices that you build. So just a couple different snippets of what that might look like is, the design and development. What's the actual blueprint look like? From a developer portal perspective, that's essentially the welcome mat for your APIs, to the gateways themselves that ensure that they're securely interoperable, to the analytics, to the security, to your policy. And the great part of this is you're not in this alone. We talked about ecosystem in the conversation. And there are a lot of individuals likely here in attendance today that want to help each other on this journey. So as we kind of wrap up the concussion here, it's an exciting time as you think about open finance. We have new technology, we have new revenue streams, we have new experiences for consumers. It's a trifecta. So I would think where we are with open financing is at a pretty interesting inflection point. And I would hope that that's one of the largest understatements that you'll hear over the next couple of days. But I would argue, please join us on this journey. Just as a lot has evolved in the industry over the past century, we're at a very interesting evolutionary point now. So open finance is now. Join us now. And thank you so much.